Transperception in the female characters Gerty and Molly of Ulysses. Introduction. Ulysses by James Joyce was published for the first time in 1922. Joyce constitutes an advanced writer in the innovation in the traditional model of the tale and constitutes a new modeling of the world. Using Lodman terminology, art is a secondary modeling system. The writer's thought is realized in a particular artistic structure, and it is inseparable from it. That was part of the structure of the artistic text. In this sense, there is a new modeling in Ulysses that imply historical and cultural variables that distinguish it and transform the previous discourse. This new modeling would imply a transperception of reality. Transperception is a neologism created by the subscriber to express the impact of reception of a text that presents breaks in the traditional narrative paradigms. Recall that, according to the Thorndike Dictionary, the definition of perception, act of perceiving, perceive, is to be aware of or through the senses, see, hear, taste, smell, or feel, taking with demand, observe. And trans is a prefix meaning across, over, through, beyond, or the other side of. What is meant by transperception is perception that is on the other side of perception. Transperception is achieved through a reading of a text that provides new models of the world different from the cliché paradigm of our senses. Highlighted elements of the female characters Gerty and Molly. The parody and desacralization of beauty, the inner monologue, the desecration of traditional values, the break with the univocal and homogeneous identity. Development. The reality represented in the fictional world of the novel takes place in the hours between the morning of June 16, 1904, until the early morning next day in the city of Dublin. The way in which the story is told refers to everyday life, being mimesis of the reality of the human being of that ages. Parody, intertextuality, and desacralization of beauty. In chapter 13, the tone is parodic. The full metaphors, walks, and parallel and Roseman mouth to describe Gerty's beauty are of a magnificent tone, parodying the classic Greek epithets of Odysseus through an implicit intertextuality with the character Nausicaa, daughter of the magnanimous Alcinous. The feminine paradigms generate alteration, distortion, and desecration because of she is linked. Gerty is lowered because not only she is not the daughter of a king, but also her father is an alcoholic. Parodic degradation. But he points out, open quotations, parody supposes the destroyment of the hero and the affirmation of a world turned upside down. It sinks its roots in the carnival, presupposes the desecration and scorn of the traditional values, to which it opposes some counter-values, vulgar, irreverence, and mockery, compared to noble, respectful, and serious. Close quotations. Transperception associated with the weekly magazine. A certain reverie is perceived and distanced from reality by having a weekly magazine as a cultural element. Gerty considers in its advice as it could fix her father's alcohol problem and domestic violence environment. Gerty's name is taken from a sentimental novel, The Lamplighter. The inner monologue, Molly's presentation. Molly's character's configuration is introduced by the image that other characters have of her. In chapter 18, the technique is the monologue, and she is going to be characterized by her own current of thought. Transperception is linked to the way of acquiring the message where one passes from one idea to another without ties, without maximum expressive freedom, stimulating to constitute the interiority of the character. Molly's monologue. Molly's being the most chaotic inner monologue of the novel when it comes to the structuring of traditional typography and the destruction of grammar rules, punctuation, and use of onomatopoeia and language games. Freezy from train, some were whistling the strength those engines, having them like big giants and the water rolling all over and out of them, all sides like the end of love's old sweet song. Transperception in onomatopoeias. Transperception is found in the capture of the true meaning of onomatopoeias, which, with their trans-rational meaning, provide a meaning that goes far beyond words. The destruction of a signifier generates the dissolution of its meaning. Therefore, the neologism generates a new meaning related to the semantic content associated, in this case, with the train, and the association of ideas with it reminds her of the time of her adolescence and the connection with love songs. Transperception in the rupture of the signifier. The word dead, a neologism invented by Joyce, arises from the union of the adjectives dead, used metaphorically, or past, theirs, and dear. That is to say, generates from the breakdown of the signifier a new meaning that constitutes the innovative sense by combining the two words. Thus, with a singular word, he points out not only that those days already belong to the past and memory, but also the sweet candor that the evocation provokes in her. From a written stroke, by breaking the signifier, dismantling the world, the meaning expands by uniting the other signifier, generates a new word, this neologism being of a new and singular perception impact, since it is linked to the new word, but also to a generalization that is apprehended by the reader. The desacralization of traditional values, Gerty. The search for personal beauty, aestheticism, consumerism, concerns for one's own image together with fashion in clothing are found in Gerty, although her budget hers to the bottom line. Gerty seems to be Nausicaa, longs for marriage. However, she observes Bloom carefully, using the unions of referenced self-control and distinguished looking stand out where the union of the respective qualifier causes an impression of totality, which is correlated with the girl's vision of the mature man. In this aspect, she joins the traditional model of a couple, but what is not very conventional is that the way she provokes him. Molly's freedom is an element to be highlighted in her monologue. She naturally refers to deception, remembers private listened moments. There is an opposition of Molly's value with the female reference character, Penelope from Odyssey, and a paradigm of fidelity. It is true that she has lost a son, and relationships with Bloom have deteriorated after that trauma, but she has another daughter, an activity and recognition within society, and yet she does not care about it. Molly explicitly renounced traditional domestic tasks, producing a transgression of classical feminine values and the demystification of the female figure as a passive representative of imposed behaviors. The suffering of both characters. In Gertie's, the father's alcoholism, domestic violence, and her own limp defect are factors that distinguish and lower her. In Molly, the suffering for her deceased son, above all, has impact on her, constituting a fundamental reason from which there was a change in her relationship with her husband. The break with the univocal and homogeneous identity, Gerty. The rupture of Gertie's identity by a dissociation between the self-control she seems to have with her friends and the enduring Gertie who showed herself to Bloom. She does not act according to what would be expected in terms of formality. Molly, her utopia is multiple fragmented because there is also an acceptance of her condition. She is at the same time a singer, a wife, a mother, and a lover, living each of these facets all at the same time. She does not feel tied to one role within the society represented, but allows herself to be multiple, being one. There is a distance from the imposed models. The degraded heroism. There is a loss of the sense of destiny and an urgency to live the present. These characters are not heroines because they are not perfect but humans. They use their freedom. Conclusions. The breakdown of traditional feminine paradigms. Transperception occurs when the female characters Gerty and Molly are analyzed. A new perception of the feminine is introduced that leads to a new modeling of the world. The configuration of the characters is given through parody, irony, and humor that presume an implicit intertextuality that contains the traditional feminine representation model, which is altered. The new modeling of the world and the breakdown of macro stories. From the extra systemic opposition, that is, with another narrative system, as is in the case of the classic Odyssey, it found that there is a new modeling of the world in Ulysses. This new modeling of the world is related to the breakdown of macro stories. These characters do not present great ideals because the world represented is beginning to change and to fragment. The result is a profound break with traditional stories, both at the linguistic level and at the level of the plot and the handling of the plot. The beginning of a social change. The change in society brings about the change in the way of conception of stories, since the great stories are losing their legitimacy. Through a transperception, a different perception of the fictional world, the complacent reader reaches the understanding of a failure of the system female subject project, typical of modernity. The emblematic value of Joyce as a true visionary and ahead of the paradigms that signal the beginning of a cultural and social change that will characterize the women of the 20th century. Thank you.